Who is the most underrated actor of all time?
It's Dolph Lundgren.
Correct. Why?
Well, because of his spiky hair and his ice-cold demeanor and his big muscles.
Absolutely.
I must break you. The guilty will be punished.
My name is Sergeant Andrew Scott.
Come on, guys, don't do this. If I don't get breakfast, I get real grumpy. I don't think you like me grumpy.
And you go in pieces, asshole.
Let's kick some ass.
Hello and welcome back to I Must Break, this podcast, the fan podcast celebrating the cinematic career of action legend Dolph Lundgren. I'm your host Sean Malloy, and on today's special interview episode, I had the pleasure of speaking with director and screenwriter Stephen Tolkin. But before we get to the conversation, I wanted to remind you all to please feel free to rate and review the show on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever else you go to subscribe. We always appreciate the reviews, especially those 5-star reviews. Those always help. Also, please be sure to check out the Facebook page for the show, I Must Break This Podcast. Here you can stay up to date on the show, the career of Mr. Dolph Lundgren, and other news regarding action cinema in general. So if you're not already following the page, please feel free to like it, share it, and continue being a fan and helping spread the word. Lastly, if you'd like to get in contact with me with ideas, suggestions, or thoughts on the show in general, you can take a look at the official webpage for the show, which is imustbreakthispodcast.wordpress.com. Now, on to today's conversation. Recently, I had the honor of speaking with Stephen Tolkin. Tolkin has been in the industry for almost 40 years, with experiences in the realms of writing, directing, and producing. Early in his career, Stephen Tolkin worked for the renegade studio Cannon Films, and during his time with Cannon, Tolkin had a hand in the rewrite of the 1987 cult Dolph classic Masters of the Universe. In fact, Stephen Tolkin was later tapped to write the unproduced sequel to Masters of the Universe, which sadly never fully got off the ground. Tolkin also went on to write the 1990 adaptation of Captain America for Menham Golan. Now, the 1990 Captain America film is one that has always been fairly near and dear to me. I've mentioned it on the show before, but outside of Mr. Dolph Lundgren, Captain America has always been my favorite comic book hero. And this was long before Disney and the Marvel Cinematic Universe were dominating Hollywood. While the film's shortcomings are largely evident, especially in terms of its budgetary limitations, the 1990 Captain America film is one that I've always enjoyed ever since I first saw it as a little kid. Similar to the Masters of the Universe movie, my expectations at the time weren't exactly huge, and I really didn't have much to compare either of these movies with. So seeing my heroes like Captain America and He-Man brought to life on screen was pretty surreal. Tolkin later went on to find a home in the world of television and TV movies, where he's flourished ever since. In this conversation, Tolkin and I chat his experiences working with Cannon, as well as his experiences with Masters of the Universe, and what could have been with the sequel. And of course, I pick his brain quite extensively on his script for Captain America. Stephen Tolkin was an amazingly kind and open individual who was a real treat to speak with, and who is still working to this day with plenty more projects in the pipeline. So, for your listening pleasure, is my conversation with Stephen Tolkin on I Must Break This Podcast.
Well, again, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. I really do appreciate it. And like I was telling you, I mean, your filmography is extremely impressive, but there are two films in particular on your filmography that really helped shape my childhood when I first watched them years ago. So thank you.
Well, then you must have had a fairly demented childhood, but that's...
I like to think I had a pretty awesome childhood, but I mean, if you look at films like Masters of the Universe and Captain America, I mean, it's kind of wild to think that okay, nowadays, comic book based movies are, that's what's driving the box office. That is what is, leading Hollywood. But back then in 1987, 1989, when you wrote those particular films, they were still kind of a taboo in Hollywood. Of course we had Batman and we had Superman, but we really didn't have comic based films like we do nowadays back then.
We were fringe. Since then, the nerds won.
Yeah.
The nerds took over the castle, right?
Yeah.
And I love that. I was, that's a triumph, that Comic-Con went from being this weird fringy thing to being the center of the universe. It's gorgeous. I was never exactly the comic book kid. Growing up, I read at summer camp. I would spend hours lying in my bunk, in the warm bunkhouse reading two things: Superman and Archie. And I didn't like Batman very much because he didn't have superpowers. I couldn't figure out, he just kind of jumped. I couldn't get behind it, I really wasn't exposed to Spider-Man. I don't think I'd ever heard of Captain America. It simply didn't cross my consciousness as a kid in the 60s. But Superman and Archie, I read every single one. That was my thing.
Well, and speaking of Superman, that's an excellent segue, because some of your early writing gigs were for Canon Films, but interestingly, this was at the tail end of their run. And
yes.
Any fan of film, okay, is familiar with the notorious Canon Films. The film that you were the documentary Electric Boogaloo, where you were interviewed. That is, I think, an amazing documentary. But
yes.
I always get the impression that Canon Films were kind of like this wild, wild west in a sense. It had to be pretty amazing working for them, right?
I was a young screenwriter, and they hired me, and I had children, and I supported myself with Canon Films when my children were very, very little. It was impossible to get paid by them. Absolutely impossible. They would just never. Their default position was screw you. And so finally it got to the point where the only way you get paid is my agent would call them and say, "Script's in my office. Send a messenger with a check." And that's how I got paid. Otherwise, there was no getting paid. And once, before we did that, I had handed in a script, and they wouldn't pay. They would just simply no. Well, whatever, maybe. And my wife went to their offices and walked into the head of the office of the head of the company. It was Chris Pierce, who ran the place, and walked past the secretary with my 4-year-old and my nursing infant, and nursed the baby on the desk chair in this guy's office till he gave her a check. It was about 6 hours. She sat there for 6 hours while the kids played, and she nursed the baby and hung out. And they didn't try to make her leave. They just understood, and finally someone came with a check. That's how Canon worked. They were, I'm going to not put too fine a point on it, they were horrible. That's another story.
Well, and I was going to ask if you could divulge because it seems like everybody has their own Canon Film story, and it sounds like you obviously have quite a few, that being one of them, obviously. So.
I've told many of them many times, so I'm trying to think. I don't think there's anything I can tell you that I haven't told before. But I will tell you one story that has to do with the sequel to Masters of the Universe. I've told this many times, so it may not be original to your podcast. I'll try to tell it succinctly. Developed a story. They came to me to do, I did a rewrite on Masters. Let me go all the way to the beginning. They sent me the script for Masters. It needed a rewrite because Gary Goddard, the child molesting Gary Goddard, I will just say, had written a script for them which they hated. David Odell had written a lovely script, and the director, Gary Goddard, had rewritten it. And Gary Goddard is many things, but not a writer. And I read it, and I was kind of horrified. And I said, well, what about that other? What did you start with? And they gave me David Odell's script, and it is magnificent. It was much better than the finished movie. It was lyrical and moving and funny and adventurous. I mean, this is the man who wrote The Dark Crystal, right? Absolutely gorgeous. First thing I did was call David Odell, whom I'd never met. I got hold of him and told him how much I loved it. And then I said to Canon, my goal here is simply to make David Odell's script work for whatever Gary needs, right? I'm here to make that script work for this director, right? And they embraced that totally because they also loved David Odell's script. And David and I bonded over this, right? And but he warned me. He just gave me a warning. Okay, well, you'll see what you're going to get. And I did an extensive rewrite that everybody embraced. And then Gary just shot his own script. He just every night would issue pages back to the script that he'd written. And nobody at Canon stopped him. And the movie was essentially unwatchable. And that's why. Because Gary was a bully and completely not the slightest interest or openness to critique or just forget critique, collaboration, discussion. Let's get into this. Let's make it work, you know?
Now, what contributions to the film did you add? I mean,
my contributions have to do with Courtney Cox and Robbie O'Neill, who I love, who's a fabulous guy. I never really got to know Courtney, but Robbie ended up directing an episode of a show that I created, and I just cannot say enough about what a wonderful person and beautiful artist he is. And he's an amazing actor. He gave it up because he wanted to be a director, but he wanted to stay an actor. He would have stayed amazing at that too. So I would say any contributions I made would really be to their scenes, which Gary maybe had less interest in messing with because he was not so interested in the human characters. But I haven't seen the movie in so long that I don't really know what I added or not. I saw it once.
I will say with regard to the inclusion of those particular characters, the Earthlings, if you will. I mean, and I've said this multiple times before, it seems like the film, especially by like the hardcore Masters of the Universe fans, they have always been kind of put off by the fact that it takes place on Earth. Why is this film about these people from Eternia going to Earth of all places? And obviously, the budget, it would have been impossible to do.
Yeah, sure, budget. And you know what? And not a bad idea. To go along with that, not only, in my opinion, as a little kid, I always thought this as well. Not only was that not a bad idea, but I mean, when you have a script based on this franchise and toy line that is so otherworldly, and you have these characters that are so larger than life from other planets, you need, in my opinion, that human component. You need that vessel for the audience to not only relate to, but to kind of go on the adventure with. And so, the characters of Courtney Cox and Robert Duncan McNeil, I always felt that they serviced that perfectly. Oh yeah, and such wonderful actors. I mean, God, And you know what, they got a great cast. I mean, Meg Foster and for God's sake, Frank Langella. And I love Dolph Lundgren. I think he's great. The
fantasy characters that started it all. The biggest selling toy product ever created. The most successful TV cartoon series. Masters of the Universe. Now takes a giant leap forward into a live action motion picture. Starring the sensation of Rocky IV. Dolph Lundgren in the live action adventure Masters of the Universe. The fantasy becomes a reality.
Yeah, well, that was going to be my question. I mean, because when you were brought on board to do the rewrites, I mean, I imagine Dolph was already attached at that point. So were you writing?
Yes. Oh, I came on. Okay. I came on while they were in prep.
Okay.
They were prepping the movie. They had all the actors. I had long meetings with Meg Foster and Frank Langella about their roles. It was thrilling for me, and they were, they comported themselves magnificently in this crazy thing. Although, the everything was so low budget around them. Although interesting, look at who cut it. I mean, Ann Coates was the editor. She edited Lawrence of Arabia, for God's sake. I mean, It's phenomenal. And she was amazing. I got to hang out with her a tiny bit. I just loved her.
Well, and I've said it before. I mean, look, I've watched a lot of Canon films, a lot, and I will say, out of all the films that Canon has done, I always felt that, and obviously I'm a little biased too, I'll say that, but I feel that Masters of the Universe is actually one of their best looking films. I mean, if you compare Masters of the Universe to, I don't know, Death Wish or Missing in Action or Ninja 3: The Domination, any of the, crazy titles they did, Masters of the Universe, I think, looks the most polished.
interesting. I haven't seen it in so long. I truly can't comment. I just, it was a dispiriting experience watching it for sure. Although I did not have a feeling of authorship about it. It was more like, really, my feeling about Masters is just like I was a crew member. I passed through. I added my little bit. They took what they took. They didn't take what they didn't take, and it was just a fun adventure in my lifetime. Not something that I consider in any way mine. And that I have to be very clear about that. I passed through the experience of the making of that movie. I have no feeling of it being mine.
Well, I mean, okay, but you brought it up, so I have to ask, because I've heard various rumblings online about the sequel. So, assuming that the sequel did get made and they did use your particular script, what would we have been able to see? What did we?
I don't remember much. I was working closely with the magnificent Albert Pune, whom I adore, and his team, and I don't remember much about the story. I had, as usual, craziness. I had 4 days to write an outline and all that. But this is the story. They brought me on because I think, first of all, I think they would have gone back to David, but I'm sure David was like sick of them and didn't want anything to do with them at that point. So they went to me because I think they felt that if Gary had shot my script, they would have had a better movie, right? They liked it very much. They wanted him to shoot it, but he just refused. And by my script, I mean my adaptation of David Odell's script to the realities of their production, right? And with an addition of a lot of stuff about the kids that I really got into because I loved them. So anyway, and they felt, I think there was a feeling that, if only we had done that. So when they had a sequel, they came to me. I was, the natural thing to come to, and it was a good gig for me. And I wrote an outline. Kind of all in I remember staying up like night after night in the office of the building there, finishing it, drinking, as I remember, Irish breakfast tea to keep myself awake. And I wrote a script, and the heart of the script was a relationship. He-Man comes to Earth. And I had, at that point, directed a short subject in which my production designer was this fabulous woman named Liz Young, who lived in a loft in downtown L.A. and was in a wheelchair. She had had an accident in her teens, and she didn't have the use of her legs, and she was in a wheelchair. And she was amazing and could get anywhere and was an artist. And I just thought of the world of her. And I thought, wow, what an inspiration she is. So I came up with the idea, which everybody embraced, which Albert and totally went for, was that He-Man comes to Earth and he falls in. They did it on Earth again with this woman who is an artist who is in a wheelchair. And the limits of He-Man's power, and he can't fix her, but then you realize she doesn't need to be fixed and all this stuff. It was a very, very, very early idea of putting this person with a disability at the center of a movie. Maybe it would have been the first. Anyway, everyone embraced it. Menham was all into it, and they got all the way to casting. They cast a woman in the role, and she was very, very committed, and she committed to spending the 6 weeks of prep in a wheelchair and not getting out of the wheelchair, right? And I would see her all over the Cannon buildings. There were 2 buildings on either side of Wilshire Boulevard, and on San Vicente on either side of Wilshire Boulevard, I would see her getting in and out of cars and with the wheelchair and moving around and going up and down ramps and figuring out every single way to negotiate everything. It was an amazing piece of actress commitment, right? And so Albert and I are working on the movie and having a great time planning it. And I don't even know if this one I'd written a script. They ordered it on the outline. I was working on the script. I don't think I ever wrote a full script. Maybe. No, I did. Just remembered I did. And we're working on the movie and getting it going and working on the other casting. And we get a call that Yoram wants to see us, Yoram Globus. So we cross Wilshire Boulevard to the north and go over to the other side. And we sit down in his office, and Albert goes like, just, stay cool, whatever. Albert's amazing. And we sit there, and Menachem had gone out of town, so Yoram was in charge. He'd gone to Israel. Yoram was in charge, I think, to make a movie, so extendedly. And he looks at us, he's glowering, like just glowering and frowning and scowling. And he puts his hands on the desk, and he leans forward, and he says to us, "Nobody wants to see a cripple." Just like that. And he said, "Take her out of the wheelchair." And that's it. So the heart and soul went out of it totally. So Albert goes to the actress, finds her, laboriously figuring out how to get in and out of her, I think, Volkswagen it was, with the wheelchair, and tells her, we're changing it. There's no wheelchair anymore. She's not going to be in a wheelchair. A woman was like, oh, damn it. I was really looking forward to that. She went skiing that weekend, fell, broke both her legs, and was in a wheelchair for 6 months. You can't make that shit up. You know what I mean? Anyway, as far as, that in itself is the whole story. But the rest of the story is, at that point, we proceeded to make the movie. Now, this is why this whole thing about the Laird Hamilton version, I don't know where that is in the timeline, because I'll tell you my memory of the timeline. Albert proceeded to make the movie with this kind of sucked out version where she wasn't in a wheelchair. I even completely forgotten how we adapted the movie, what we did. It's at that point, the curtain falls in my memory in terms of what I did. Maybe Albert took it over and did that other version with the football player. It's possible that I didn't. I don't know. I know this. The toy company, which company is it?
Mattel.
Mattel had a department for dealing with media, right? And every day Albert made notes. No, he wouldn't wear this kind of medal. No, He-Man wouldn't say that. No, you can never show She-Ra doing this. No, you can never show that. And finally, to their credit, Menham and Yoram called them and said, you know what? Enough. We're not making the movie. You're too much meddling. We just won't make it. It's too much trouble. And the karmic upshot of that, I heard, is that Mattel instantly fired that entire department, all the people who'd done that. But it was too late. They just didn't make the movie. And that's what I heard happened to the sequel.
Interesting. Yeah, it's really kind of wild how there's so many stories regarding this sequel. I mean, obviously there's multiple drafts that were written. And then,
have you read drafts of it?
Unfortunately, I haven't. And if you still have your draft, I would love to read it.
You know what? I have an attic that has been filling up since we moved into the house in 1987, which is right around these events, right?
Uh-huh.
And I'm not a hoarder because the downstairs is clean as a whistle, but up in that attic, it needs an A&E reality show to come in, and I believe that I will find the script or outline for it in there. And people have been asking me for there's a couple of people have been asking me for the Captain America script forever, and if it's in the attic somewhere, and one of these days I will have the time and breath in my life to go up there and find it. And if I do, I will find the Masters of the Universe sequel for you, and I will give it to you, and you can make whatever use of it you will. I remember being very, very, very pleased with my kooky little story about He-Man and the girl in the wheelchair.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Well, because, it's gone on record, I think, that Albert Pune was able to salvage what had been developed for the Masters of the Universe sequel, as well as the Spider-Man movie, and he was able to salvage the sets and the costumes and everything for his movie Cyborg.
Yeah. Have you talked to Albert?
I haven't had the pleasure of speaking with Albert. I've reached out to him, actually, but I haven't spoken to him, actually.
He is. There are some health issues there. I'll just say that. So that may be why. I talked to him about 2 years ago. He's just a fabulous person. Just such love of film, and he's fabulous. Just a beautiful guy, beautiful person.
Well, and I was actually fortunate back when I think it was back in 2011. I was able to reach out to him, and I did get. This is actually an excellent segue because he was selling his director's cut of the Captain America film. And so I did reach out to him, and I did get a copy of that, and he did sign it for me. And so, looking at that film, look, I would be kicking myself if I didn't ask you about Captain America.
Oh, and yeah.
When we first got in contact, I told you of my appreciation for the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just say this, Mr. Tolkin. I love this movie. I've always been, ever since I was a little kid, and this is the honest to God truth. But I always tell my children that I'm the OG Cap fan, because back before Marvel was dominating the box office and Captain America was, everyone's favorite, he was not, at least in my opinion, in my social circle, he was not the cool superhero I think that he is nowadays. And so as a little kid, again, we had Michael Keaton's Batman, we had Christopher Reeve's Superman, but we didn't have much in terms of cinematic superheroes. And so when I first saw the Captain America movie, I can look at it now through adult eyes, and I can certainly see its shortcomings. But I will say, when I saw it as a little kid, I didn't have much to stack it up against, to compare it to. And so for me, it was amazing. I mean, I rented that movie on VHS ad nauseum. It is, I think, considering what everyone was going through, because I've heard various stories, in my opinion, I think you guys pulled off a really cool little movie.
Where'd you get your guinea pig?
Happens to be the best damn candidate out of 600 volunteers.
A secret experiment gave one man the strength of 100.
The rest of the world, he's just codenamed Captain America.
And the power to save millions.
The Jerry's had an experimental rocket ready to fire at a target somewhere in the United States.
Only he could defeat a superhuman madman.
They got a fella called the Red Skull heading up their outfit. All we can hope to get in there is one good man.
But saving the world left him trapped in an icy grave until fate released him to finish a battle started decades ago.
Yeah, he's still alive. We don't know where he is or who he is.
Now, an evil genius is on the verge of global domination.
Captain America, you gotta help us.
And only Captain America can stop him. Ronnie Cox, Ned Beatty, Darren McGavin, Kim Gillingham, Scott Paulin as the Red Skull, and Matt Salinger as the Marvel Comics hero, Captain America.
Well, I will say that for me, the equivalent movie is Journey to the Center of the Earth. The movie that I couldn't rent it on, you had to see it when you could see it, because there were no VHS, there was no way to see it on demand. But Journey to the Center of the Earth completely dominated my imagination in my childhood. And when I saw it in my 20s, I couldn't believe what a bad movie it is. But it absolutely just filled my head and changed my life. Have you ever seen it? The old 50s Journey to the Center of the Earth?
Yeah.
And I mean, incredibly fun, but also a bad movie. I'm very happy that you like Captain America. I will say my experience was this. I needed money. I was a young screenwriter, and I got asked to write this movie. And I was excited to be able to write a movie. There was an existing script by, what's his name, Larry something, that had a couple of pieces in it that I took. It was just a different direction than they wanted to go. And I was not familiar with Captain America. I was not a superhero fan, as I said. I was DC, not Marvel, if anything, and I liked Superman when I was 10, but I had not remained that. And I was cynical, and I was not idealistic, or I don't know. I read the comic books. I read a bunch, and I said I could not see how to do it straight. I just could not see how to do it straight. I'm going to cut slightly ahead of the game and say when I saw the new version with Chris Evans, I said, well, that's how you do it straight. And I love the new version. Love. And I wanted to call the writers, whom I do not know, and say, guys, I was so the wrong writer for it 20 years ago, and you guys are so the right writer for it. But back to my story. And because I really wasn't the right writer for it, but I wanted to do it. Because it was a job and it was fun, and it was very likely to get made. So I read the comic strips, and I was going, how do I do this? I don't believe in this sort of patriotic superhero thing, and it's just so innocent and gung ho, and I just don't feel it. And I was, it didn't fit my politics, although it's not political. It didn't feel like it fit my politics, and I just couldn't understand it at all. And I was driving through L.A. and this Gil Scott-Heron song came on called Winter in America. Do you know the song? I'm sure you don't.
No.
And it was all about it's winter in America, and there's a lyric, and all the heroes have been killed or betrayed. That's it. And all the heroes have been killed or betrayed. And suddenly I saw the entire movie. And so I said, there is a way to write a leftist superhero movie. There is a way, right? So I did it. I don't know if you ever felt the leftist politics in it, but that's the point. And Menham said it has to be Italy for reasons that nobody ever knew, so it became an Italian fascist rather than Nazis and all that, right? But there was one Captain America comic, which I'm sure you've read, where he gets frozen in ice and comes back in the 60s, right?
Yeah.
And so I made it, he comes back in the 90s, right? So instead of it being Captain America walking around and seeing hippies and going, what's wrong with them, It was Captain America walking around seeing yuppies and going, what's wrong with them? Nobody has any idealism. Nobody cares. You know what I mean? That was the idea. It was a completely different take. So I said, well, that's a story I can tell because it becomes a story about now, right? So everything grew out of that. And then the idea that it was the implanting of the microchip and somebody controlling the American president that may have come from the earlier draft, probably not. But it was all about a fascist takeover of America, right? About turning Ronnie Cox into a tool of fascism. Well, you can see there's a certain resonance to the present day from that, right? And so because we came very, 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 very close, and I actually believe it's parallel because I actually think that the Russians did plant effectively a microchip in Trump's head to guide him to leading America to totalitarianism. So the movies come true. We narrowly escaped that bullet, very, very narrowly, and we may not escape it yet. So that was what I was writing about. And that with that fuel, I think I wrote the script in a week and a half. And it all kind of just came together, and the Italians and his childhood as his little boy, and he was taken by the fascists and bent into something evil, that there was something good inside the Red Skull, and Dr. Vasari and with the whole idea that the Red Skull and Captain America were both bent by the same hand of evil and all that. That all came very, very quickly once I knew what I was saying. Once you know what you're saying, they were brothers, right? Once you know what you're saying, it comes easy, and it just flooded out of me, right? And I was dazzled by the reaction to it because, and this is the best thing about the entire experience for me. It goes without saying, was getting to know and hang out with and become close to Stan Lee. That was everything. Now, Stan Lee in those days was not what he is now. Stan Lee was a cult figure, not a figure of universal stardom. You know, he was a cult figure, not a megastar. And but I got to tell you, he was one of the great people I've ever met in my life by any standard. Not only in terms of his artistic genius, but just as a human being, one of the great, generous-souled people I've ever met. And he said to me, "This script is genius. It's the best script ever written of any of my blood." I mean, he could not say enough. And for a young writer, this was amazing. And the reaction from the actors, Melinda Dillon, at that point was at the height of everything. You know, she was a Spielberg. You know what I mean? That Melinda Dillon, who I was completely in love with from Close Encounters, she was my favorite actress in the world. That she was in it, and she came up to me and kissed me on the cheek and said, "You're a genius." I get called a genius. Maybe it's the only time I've ever been called a genius. Really, that's it. Stan Lee and Melinda Dillon. That's it. The two times in my life. You know. I'm an above average writer. I have ability. I'm talented. I can do it. I have a career. You know, there's a reason for it. But that script elicited comments from those two people that I have not deserved and have not heard. Right. And the team that he got, there was something about that script that touched a nerve in people. I think they liked its politics. People liked its politics. They liked it how atypical it was to the usual superhero movie. They shared my feelings about straight superhero movies, feelings which were, I must underline, mistaken. I was wrong, Sean. I was wrong. I was the wrong writer for the project.
You know, I don't think so, because okay, if you look at the film nowadays and you compare it, I mean, it's a different version of Captain America. But the one thing that I've always enjoyed about it is, okay, yeah, there's some criticisms that Captain America seems to be running from his attackers, and
yes,
he doesn't wear the costume throughout the entire second act. However, this is how I interpreted it, and I don't know if you did it the same way. I mean, but, okay, first of all, okay, this was the early 90s, late 80s, so movies around that time movies based on comic books were still kind of in that phase where they were sort of embarrassed to be based on comic books. So you couldn't have him running around in that red, white, and blue the entire movie. At least that's how I interpreted it. But the other way I interpreted it was, okay, you have a Steve Rogers who has this innocence and this naivete about himself, to where he almost views himself as being unworthy of living up to the mantle and wearing the costume. And that's how I interpret it, as he was this guy who he didn't look upon himself as being as being the hero that he needed to be. And so by the end of the movie, when he puts on the costume again, he's thinking, okay, you know what? I got to do this. That's how I interpreted it.
I like that. I'll go with that. I think that's good.
Okay.
I think that's good. I really want you to read the script. I would love to read the script. The movie is not the script for a few reasons. There are many, many, many diversions from what I wrote. I don't remember what they are. I just remember going through that experience. One is Albert had less money than he needed, right? So he had to make alterations as he went along. He was away in Yugoslavia making the movie. After saying this movie has to be Italy, I have to shoot in Italy, then they shot in Yugoslavia. We bent the whole story around Italy, and then it wasn't shot there. Although Albert did a great job with locations. They look gorgeous. And so there he is in Yugoslavia. I'm not there. I was actually in Russia, of all things, working on another project for part of the time he was there. I was on the set. The only time I was on the set was the day I shot my scene, where I played the photographer at the wedding.
Right. I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, and that was shot somewhere in South Bay, LA. We'll talk about that, but that was a very fun day. But so they were in Yugoslavia, and so he didn't have me to work on the changes with him, and so the script had to be altered as it went along for budget reasons that were inevitable, and just a lot changed, and also the script was too long. So in the cutting, things had to be lost, and that's on me. That's my bad. I just learned since that scripts need less than you think they need, and it's better to rewrite them in the script than stage than in the editing sometimes. Although editing can be great, obviously. So it is not the movie I wrote, but I have a feeling even if they had shot the movie I wrote, I might have the same problems with it. And yeah, he runs from his attackers. I want to read the script to see if I did. I've read recently a review where someone says, he pretends to be sick twice in the movie or something like that. I have no recollection of writing that, and I'd be very curious to find the script and find out whether that was me or something that they did for some exigency or other in the course of. I don't know. Matt, again, lovely guy. Got to know him pretty well. Spoken to him a bit through the years. Matt Salinger. He may have been. He was the right choice for the script I wrote. Right, a more introspective Steve. You know what I mean? A more whatever it is. But he wasn't. He wasn't. He and I were both not exactly the right match for the material. But was a lovely actor and did a great job with what it was.
Well, and I know that this was, correct me if I'm wrong, but I know that this was intended to be like a really big theatrical release. And then suddenly the budget is dwindled and the film had to be simplified. And then unfortunately, because I remember being a little kid, I remember seeing the poster for the movie in theater lobbies. And I remember it was in a bunch of trade magazines that were, regarding the film's production, because I picked up an issue of what was it, Cinefantastique, I believe it was, and so it was they were hyping and promoting the Dick Tracy movie, and of course Batman and Ninja Turtles, and Captain America was in there, and then it just sat, and
because people saw it.
Yeah.
It sat because then people saw it.
Okay, so.
Oh my God! You were how old when you first saw it?
Okay, so if I go back, when I saw the posters in theater lobbies, I was 8, but I was not able to finally see it because it got released to VHS in the summer of '92. So I was 10 years old.
You were 10
years old when I finally was able to see it. But I will say too, it was, of course, my love of Captain America and this movie that made me want to be Captain America for Halloween that fall. And around that time, if you can go back this far, we didn't have the cool Halloween costumes that the kids have nowadays with the muscles.
You had to make it.
My mom had to make this thing. So
wonderful.
Yeah, but okay, so the screenings, the film is screened, I imagine, and you see it. What were your reactions when you saw the final cut?
I was about to answer that. So I went to see it with a couple of friends, a bunch of friends, actually, a whole pack of friends, many of whom were sort of in the Cannon family. Like, we all sort of went to this screening together. It was at the Directors Guild Theater. The old Directors Guild Theater on Sunset. I remember it with frightening clarity. And I saw the movie, and it ended, and there was a sushi bar next door. And my friends, I remember exactly who they were, had to lift me by my arms out of the seat, help me up the aisle, practically carry me next door, and pour sake down my throat. I remember literally being held and my head tilted back, and somebody taking a glass of cold sake and pouring it down my throat to revive me.
So this is interesting to me. So, looking at your script for the film and what was ultimately shot, I guess, why were you disappointed? Or better yet, what were you hoping would make it to screen and was unfortunately cut? Because I imagine your script had to be simplified because Albert and company didn't have the budget to pull it off. So what was cut?
It's not about cut. It's not about what was missing. It's not at all about that. I by that point, I'd already directed my own thing. I knew everything there. I knew all about having to cut stuff, and you make the movie. I knew by then that the movie you write is not the movie you shoot, and the movie you shoot is not the movie you cut. Right? That process is a change. You make 3 movies. You write one, you shoot another one, and you edit another one. 3 separate movies. No, it wasn't that. I did not feel. I will tell you the thoughts that were not going through my head. He fucked up my script. No. That was not going through my head. He did a terrible job with it. No, that is not going through my head. What went through my head is it's just a terrible movie. I didn't blame Albert. I think I probably blamed myself. I saw that the entire story was preposterous. And I think probably more than anything, the cheesiness forced on the movie by the budget, the rocket that lands in Washington and the completely implausible and unconvincing, and I would say even unprofessional is the wrong word because I don't want to say anything to cast shade on Albert, who I love and admire. The incomplete effects, the insufficient visual effects, right, left it in the realm, unfortunately, through no fault of Albert's, in the realm of the cheesy, right? And then there is Scott Paulin, who another person I became friends with and stayed friends with for years after that. Fabulous actor, fabulous guy, right? The cheesiness of the Red Skull makeup, in spite of the fact of how fabulous Scott was in the role. And also it was very, very complicated. It wasn't exactly, it's hard to recall the things from the past that were being echoed in the present. And when he goes home, it's hard to know that this is the same woman he's talking to, and all these things which, as a screenwriter, I would better address now. So at the end of the day, I would say I wouldn't have been paralyzed to the point of being unable to get out of my chair and have to have alcohol poured down my throat to revive me if I didn't feel that the fault was mine.
Well, I will tell you again. I hate putting you putting the blame on yourself regarding a lot of this, but I will say again, sure, Scott Paulin's Red Skull he has a red skull for maybe 5 minutes of the movie, but again, as a little kid watching this, I remember thinking to myself, well, this is what Captain America and the Red Skull would look like in real life. Like, if, you know what I mean? Like, if they were going to, transplant this and put this into the real world, a talking skull that is red, that's going to look a little silly. This is how it would look in the real life. And obviously, they've been able to adjust to that and make it work nowadays. But again, for me, Mr. Tolkin, back in 1992 when I saw it, it was acceptable for me. Because, I remember thinking to myself, well, you know what, if they came out of the comic book pages, this might be how it would look. This is, acceptable for a movie. So.
Oh, I like that. I feel that Albert, I've never talked to him about this, How did you feel about the movie? The beauty of Albert is he's the most positive person. He is like, he loves being on set. He loves working with the actors. He loves the process. He gets frustrated with things not having enough money and movies that don't get made and all that. But he's such a wonderful team spirit. He's got fantastic team spirit and loves the art and craft of film so much, you know. So, but I never asked him what he thought about it and what he felt about the ways in which it fell short, you know. And I would hate to think that he would hear this and think that I held anything against him. He directed with such verve and vigor and joy all the way through, and that's why I take it as much on me as on anything else. I'm just going to say I'm going to split this with Menachem Golan, The Problem, you know, and leave Albert in the clear. This is what I also learned. Sometimes scripts that everybody loves, that read magnificently, that are these fantastic reads, that are written in this way that makes people just, you know, love the read of them, does not mean it's going to be a good movie. And I remember I was working with Arnold Kopelson in the early 90s, and they were doing The Fugitive, and I read the script for The Fugitive, you know, the one that was made with Harrison Ford and Tommy Lee Jones, right? And I read it, and I was like, what? Nothing happens. He chases him, and they confront, and it's over. It's like, what's the movie? There's no complexity. And then I saw the movie, which was exactly the script, and it blew me away. It was a huge lesson to me. The fabulous literary script with all the wonderful turns and this and that and flourishes and Italian kids playing the Chopin preludes in houses in Italy in the 30s. You know what I mean? Bullshit. What makes a movie is the essence of the story. And Fugitive, the reading The Fugitive and seeing it was a huge lesson to me in screenwriting. Then I realized it was a magnificent script. It just wasn't written as a literary thing. It was written as this is how the movie's going to work, and it did.
Well, okay, so if we step slightly outside of the realm of Masters of the Universe and Captain America, I mean, I've noticed, I mean, you've really flourished in the world of television, obviously, and TV movies. I mean, so I guess I'm just kind of curious. I mean, do you prefer writing and directing and working on you know, films that are meant for television, or I mean, do you approach a you know, feature-length film the same way as you would a television movie?
Well,
like, how does that work?
It's a very simple story. Let me see if I can get the timing right. In the early 90s, I wrote three things. I wrote an adaptation as features. I wrote an adaptation of an off-Broadway play called Beirut, which was about, and I rewrote it, and called it Daybreak. And it was about resistance fighters in a fascist America. You can see my theme here. At the time of a plague, so, you know, somewhat topical. I wrote that as a feature for Atlantic Pictures, or I forget who. I wrote an adaptation of Dean Koontz's Intensity, or developed Dean Koontz Intensity as a feature, and also a third one. There was a third one that I developed as a feature. I'm forgetting exactly what it was right now. And they all, within a space of a few years, got made on television. And I had at that point been writing features for many years, and all of which, except for Captain America, had not gotten made, right? So these three things I write for features get made on TV and all do very well. They're all, you know, they all work out. And Daybreak had Cuba Gooding Jr., and Intensity was a huge hit on Fox as a miniseries, and the other one was maybe another Dean Koontz thing, no, it was something else. Anyway, and they all got made on TV in the space of a year, and they all did well, and they flourished, and people wanted to hire me, and it was like suddenly I was not scrambling anymore, and I suddenly the clouds parted, and I went, oh my God, I get the message. I'm a television writer. This is where I've landed, and it just felt completely right, and I lost all interest in writing features at that point. It's very interesting. I was in an airplane on the way to Toronto, on the way to go direct the script for a television movie that I'd written with Christine Lottie, one that I really loved called Judgment Day. And I was sitting there, and I'd just written a feature script for New Line. And I sit into my seat on business class, because I got to fly your business class, because that's the union deal. And sitting across from me is my executive from New Line, Richard Saperstein, reading my script. That was his airplane reading. And we smiled at each other, and we said, this is awkward. And I faced forward, and I realized my two lives, my feature life, which had gone on for about 10 years at that point, and my new life in television were just like they crossed each other in the ocean, going in different directions. And I felt this enormous sense of, I landed where I'm supposed to be. And I never looked back. And I have not stopped working, really, since then. And before that, it was always a struggle. I've done two things in TV. I love doing true crime because, and I started doing it. I did my first one in 1998. Oh, actually, no. It came out. I actually started in like 96. And I love it because it's human behavior at its extreme on display. It's like normal people doing insane shit. You know what I mean? There, but for the grace of God. Oh my God, any of us could be pushed that far. I love that. And I love doing that. And I've also created a bunch of series. I've worked in series equally. You know, I've worked on stuff I've created on my own and stuff that I don't know if you as a genre person watched Legends of the Seeker, but that's like one of my favorite things I've ever worked on. You were too old for it at the time, but, or I don't know, maybe not, maybe it wasn't your show, but I loved working on that, and I loved working on Perception and Brothers and Sisters. I have a wide range of stuff I'm interested in. But as far as your question, the other day, about a month ago, an idea for a feature floated into my head, and I'm going to sit and noodle with it a bit, but I haven't really thought about it in decades. It's just not, it wasn't where my destiny lay.
Well, you know, I mean, it's interesting because I remember watching Somewhere Between when that premiered in the summer of 2017. I mean, and yes. Paula Patton, I've always enjoyed Paula Patton. I think she's yes. an amazing actress. But yeah, that was really cool. You know, to see that one when that one was on television. And you know, it's interesting because I think anymore, not just for, I mean. And if I'm completely wrong in this, please let me know. But it seems like anymore, especially nowadays due to the pandemic shutdown that we've had, it seems like working in television is almost preferred by audiences nowadays, thanks to a lot of these streaming services and whatnot. I mean, well,
at this point, what's the difference between television and movies? Because nobody's. I mean, how do you know an Emmy from an Oscar?
Exactly.
I've seen all the movies this year. I haven't been in a theater. I've seen everything on TV. So I don't know how they decide which gets nominated for which. I'm not even kidding.
Well, even my wife, I was talking about this the other day with my wife. She actually has gotten to the point, I mean, we have kids now and everything like that. She actually prefers picking up a television show and watching an episodic television show as opposed to sitting down and viewing a film. And obviously, you know, she has her reasons, as do other people. But it's really interesting nowadays. I mean, if you look at a lot of teenagers and just, you know, young adults in general, the idea of sitting down for an entire movie is almost kind of, you can't even fathom it anymore. It seems like people prefer an episodic television show. And even if it is going to be a movie, we like the idea and the comfort of, okay, we can watch 30 minutes tonight and then watch another 30 minutes tomorrow night.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I know what you mean. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, my wife and I love to commit to a series and just hang in this is interesting. I'm a huge fan of Song of Ice and Fire. I mean, I read, you know, George R. R. Martin. I read every word of it. I ate it up. It was one of my favorite books of all time, absolutely up there with Lord of the Rings and War and Peace, you know, is my favorite books. And I think it's the mashup of the two. And I refused to see the show. I was like, my kids were like, you have to see it, Dad. I know we love the books too. I said, no, I don't want their images in my head. I want mine. I know my Circe. I see my everything. I don't want to see theirs. I want to see mine. And my son's like, no, Dad, I'm telling you, it's really good. You're going to love it. No, absolutely not. And then, so they went through with it 6 seasons, and the last season's coming up, whatever the last season was. And it was like a month away, right? And my wife and I looked at each other and we said, fuck, let's just do it. So we binged all of the seasons in 2 weeks. 8 hours at a time sometimes. We would just sit there in our living room with blankets across our knees and order Indian food and watch entire seasons in a day. And it was a fantastic experience to see that whole epic in a few weeks. You know, It was fantastic, and my kids were right, and it was awesome. You know, I'm glad I did that.
Have you and your wife watched? To go on a slight little tangent, but have you guys watched Your Honor on Showtime?
No, is it good?
It's amazing. It's amazing.
I will watch it.
So, well, this has been an absolute pleasure. Obviously, I want to be respectful of your time, and I appreciate you sitting down with me and talking as long as you did with me about these silly little films. Like I said, you can, as I told you earlier when I wrote you, you can rest assured that these films have have made an impact on me. So thank you very much.
I'm very, very glad, and I just want to end by saying I remember my time at Canon only with great fondness. It was a source of many great stories. Menham and Yoram, in spite of things I've said about them, were generous in spirit in their willingness to just make tons of movies, right? And just hire tons of people and make tons of movies and just put stuff out there, you know? And that you have to thank them for. And for a young screenwriter who wasn't getting stuff produced, to just be in the game and have and see stuff made was absolutely thrilling. I wouldn't have missed 1 second of it for anything, and I especially would not have missed getting to know the amazing and wonderful Albert Pune. So thank you so much for your interest in all of this.